The Inquisitorius, an extension of the Sith and the Galactic Empire, was a unit tasked with a clear mission: the identification, hunting, and elimination of surviving Jedi following Order 66. At first glance, this organization appeared formidable, wielding the dark side of the Force, advanced training, and the full backing of the Emperor and Darth Vader. However, when examined critically, their inability to effectively handle scattered Jedi remnants reveals numerous structural weaknesses, operational inefficiencies, and inherent contradictions within their design and purpose. Despite their potential for terror and destruction, the Inquisitors were fundamentally ill-suited to succeed against Jedi adversaries. Their failures were rooted not just in external factors but also in their intrinsic limitations as an organization and as individuals. To begin with, the origins of the Inquisitors themselves sowed the seeds of their weakness. Many of the Inquisitors were former Jedi who had been coerced, broken, or seduced into serving the dark side. This meant that their loyalty was often tenuous, their will fractured, and their resolve compromised. Unlike true Sith, who were conditioned through a lifetime of ambition, betrayal, and ruthlessness, the Inquisitors were essentially turned victims, wielding anger and fear rather than true mastery over the Force. Their transition from Jedi to Inquisitor left them in a psychological limbo, often clouded by inner conflict. While the dark side gave them power, it also fueled instability and doubt. Many of them had been Jedi Padawans or knights who lacked the advanced training or experience necessary to match the mastery of Jedi who had survived the Purge, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi or Ahsoka Tano. Moreover, the Sith philosophy itself undermined the Inquisitorius. The Sith operate on a rule of two: a master and an apprentice, engaged in a delicate dance of power and succession. The creation of the Inquisitors introduced a middle tier that clashed with this philosophy. For Palpatine and Vader, the Inquisitors were tools, disposable assets meant to clean up remnants of the old order. They were not apprentices to be cultivated and elevated, but pawns to be expended. This disdain for their own operatives led to a lack of investment in their development. The Inquisitors received enough training to hunt and intimidate, but they were never truly empowered or trusted. This left them as a half measure, too weak to challenge powerful Jedi and too independent to be wholly controlled. The resulting tension between the Inquisitors and their Sith overlords further hampered their effectiveness. Fear of failure, driven by the threat of Vader's wrath, often paralyzed them or led to rash decisions. The organizational structure of the Inquisitorius also contributed to its shortcomings. The Inquisitors were expected to compete with one another, fostering an environment of distrust and internal sabotage. This infighting weakened their collective strength and ensured that they could rarely function as a cohesive unit. While competition might have been intended to sharpen their skills, in practice, it often devolved into petty rivalries and backstabbing. The lack of camaraderie and coordination was a stark contrast to the unity and purpose that Jedi survivors exhibited. The Jedi, even when scattered and isolated, could rely on their shared principles and training to work together effectively when the need arose. The operational scope of the Inquisitorius also hindered their effectiveness. The galaxy is vast, and the Jedi survivors were both resourceful and deeply attuned to the Force, allowing them to hide effectively. The Inquisitors were stretched thin, tasked with scouring countless worlds for elusive targets. Their reliance on the Empire's intelligence network often meant they were several steps behind their prey, reacting to rumors and sightings rather than proactively hunting. This reactive approach allowed many Jedi to evade capture or prepare for confrontations on their terms. Furthermore, the Inquisitors' heavy-handed tactics often alerted their targets, giving Jedi time to flee or fight back. Unlike the Sith, who thrived on subtlety and manipulation, the Inquisitors relied on brute force and intimidation, which were less effective against seasoned Jedi. The Inquisitors' combat capabilities were another critical weakness. While they were trained in the dark side and given specialized weapons, including their distinctive spinning lightsabers, their skills paled in comparison to those of experienced Jedi. Many of the surviving Jedi were battle-hardened veterans of the Clone Wars, with years of combat experience against both droids and Sith. In contrast, the Inquisitors were often unrefined, relying on aggression and fear rather than technique and strategy. Their over-reliance on their spinning lightsabers, for instance, often became a liability against skilled opponents who could exploit their predictable movements. This gap in skill was further exacerbated by the Inquisitors' lack of discipline. Jedi training emphasized control, balance, and adaptability, whereas the Inquisitors' training focused on rage and domination, leaving them vulnerable to calculated counterattacks. The leadership of the Inquisitorius was another point of failure. While Darth Vader's involvement lent them an aura of authority, his leadership style was far from conducive to their success. Vader ruled through fear, punishing failure with ruthless efficiency. While this ensured obedience, it also stifled initiative and creativity among the Inquisitors. They became more focused on avoiding Vader's wrath than on effectively executing their missions. This fear-based dynamic created a cycle of failure, as Inquisitors who made mistakes were eliminated, depriving the organization of experienced members and discouraging others from taking risks. Vader's own disdain for the Inquisitors further undermined their morale and effectiveness. To him, they were tools, unworthy of his respect or investment. This lack of support from their nominal leader left the Inquisitors isolated and vulnerable. Another key factor in the Inquisitorius' weakness was their lack of ideological grounding. The Jedi drew strength from their commitment to the Force and their belief in their mission to protect and serve. This sense of purpose sustained them even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Inquisitors, in contrast, were driven by fear, anger, and a desire for survival. These motivations, while potent, were ultimately hollow and self-destructive. Their lack of a unifying ideology or higher purpose left them fragmented and aimless. Even their allegiance to the Sith was born of coercion rather than conviction, further eroding their effectiveness. The Jedi they hunted, by contrast, often fought not just for survival but for the hope of restoring balance to the galaxy. This moral and spiritual clarity gave the Jedi an edge that the Inquisitors could never match. Finally, the Inquisitorius was hampered by the inherent contradictions of its mission. The Jedi were symbols of hope and resistance, and their survival inspired others to oppose the Empire. The Inquisitors' brutal tactics often had the unintended effect of galvanizing resistance rather than quelling it. Their presence on a world was a clear sign of the Empire's fear and insecurity, undermining the image of invincibility that Palpatine sought to project. Moreover, the very act of hunting Jedi required the Inquisitors to confront the remnants of an order that had shaped the galaxy for millennia. This put them in constant contact with the Jedi's teachings, artifacts, and followers, exposing them to the light side of the Force. For some Inquisitors, this proximity to the Jedi's legacy created doubt and internal conflict, further weakening their resolve. The Inquisitorius' inability to decisively defeat the Jedi was not merely a result of external challenges, but a reflection of its fundamental flaws. From their origins and training to their leadership and tactics, the Inquisitors were plagued by weaknesses that left them ill-equipped to fulfill their mission. While they succeeded in instilling fear and eliminating some Jedi, their failures were emblematic of the Empire's broader inability to fully extinguish the spark of rebellion. The Jedi, scattered and diminished though they were, proved resilient in the face of oppression. This resilience highlighted the limitations of the Inquisitorius and underscored the enduring power of the Force. When viewed through this lens, the Inquisitorius stands not as a symbol of imperial strength, but as a testament to the Empire's fear and insecurity. Their inability to overcome the Jedi ultimately foreshadowed the larger failure of the Sith's grand design. The failure of the Inquisitorius to eliminate the Jedi survivors was further compounded by the inherent limitations of their reliance on fear and intimidation. The dark side of the Force, while powerful, is inherently corrosive. It relies on emotions like anger, hatred, and fear, which can grant significant power in the short term, but often lead to instability and self-destruction. This was evident in the Inquisitors, whose dependency on these emotions made them volatile and prone to mistakes. The Jedi, in contrast, trained for years in the discipline of the light side, fostering inner peace, clarity, and resilience. These qualities allowed them to maintain focus and outmaneuver the Inquisitors, who were often blinded by their rage and overconfidence. Another significant factor contributing to the Inquisitorius' weakness was their over-reliance on technology and their spinning lightsabers, which became a crutch rather than a tool. The spinning mechanism of their lightsabers was designed to intimidate opponents and grant them an advantage in combat, but it also made their fighting style predictable. Experienced Jedi could exploit this predictability, turning the Inquisitors' own weapons against them. Moreover, the mechanical nature of these lightsabers reflected a lack of true mastery over the Force. Traditional Jedi and Sith lightsabers were symbols of their wielder's skill and connection to the Force, crafted as part of a deeply personal process. The spinning lightsabers of the Inquisitors, in contrast, were mass-produced and lacked the same spiritual significance. This disparity in their approach to the weapon underscored the philosophical and practical gaps between the Inquisitors and the Jedi they hunted. The Jedi survivors also had a key advantage in their understanding of the galaxy and its inhabitants. Having served as peacekeepers and diplomats for generations, the Jedi had a deep knowledge of galactic cultures, politics, and environments. This allowed them to navigate the galaxy with a level of finesse that the Inquisitors lacked. Many Jedi had established connections with sympathetic individuals and groups who were willing to provide aid, shelter, or information. The Inquisitors, on the other hand, were seen as agents of oppression and were often met with resistance or hostility. This difference in perception gave the Jedi a significant edge in evasion and strategy. The galaxy itself, vast and diverse, became a kind of ally to the Jedi, offering countless places to hide and regroup. The Inquisitors' inability to adapt to their adversaries' strengths further highlighted their limitations. The Jedi who survived Order 66 were not only skilled but also adaptive, having learned to survive in a galaxy that was now openly hostile to them. They had faced overwhelming odds during the Clone Wars and had developed a keen understanding of tactics and improvisation. The Inquisitors, in contrast, operated with a rigid and formulaic approach. Their primary tactic was to intimidate and overpower their targets, which worked against weaker opponents but failed against seasoned Jedi. This inflexibility made them vulnerable to ambushes, traps, and other strategies employed by the Jedi. Time and again, the Inquisitors found themselves outmaneuvered and defeated, not because they lacked power, but because they lacked the creativity and adaptability of their prey. The presence of Darth Vader within the Inquisitorius also created a paradoxical dynamic that weakened the organization. While Vader's oversight ensured that the Inquisitors operated with discipline and focus, it also stifled their growth and autonomy. Vader's overwhelming power cast a shadow over the Inquisitors, making them acutely aware of their inferiority. This awareness bred fear and resentment, which further eroded their effectiveness. The Inquisitors were constantly aware that they were expendable in Vader's eyes, a fact that diminished their morale and commitment. Additionally, Vader's involvement often meant that the most challenging missions fell to him rather than the Inquisitors, preventing them from gaining the experience necessary to grow stronger. The psychological toll of being an Inquisitor cannot be understated. Many of them were former Jedi who had been broken and corrupted by the Sith. This corruption, while granting them power, also left deep scars. The transition from Jedi to Inquisitor was not just a change in allegiance, but a fundamental betrayal of their former selves. This internal conflict created a vulnerability that the Jedi survivors could exploit. For example, some Jedi attempted to redeem Inquisitors by appealing to their former identities, a tactic that occasionally succeeded. Even when these appeals failed, they often created hesitation or doubt in the Inquisitors, which could be decisive in combat. The burden of their past, combined with the relentless demands of their mission, left many Inquisitors emotionally unstable and prone to failure. The Jedi Code, which emphasized restraint, compassion, and the greater good, provided a stark contrast to the Inquisitors' ethos of fear and domination. This contrast often worked against the Inquisitors in ways they could not anticipate. While the Inquisitors sought to crush their enemies through brute force, the Jedi leveraged their understanding of the Force and their connection to others to outthink and outmaneuver them. This difference in philosophy also extended to their approach to combat. The Inquisitors, driven by anger and aggression, often underestimated their opponents, leading to overconfidence and mistakes. The Jedi, guided by discipline and awareness, were able to turn the Inquisitors' aggression against them, exploiting their lack of control. The Inquisitorius relationship with the broader imperial hierarchy also posed challenges. While the Inquisitors were nominally part of the Empire, their connection to the Sith made them a separate entity with their own agenda. This created tension with other branches of the imperial military and intelligence services, who often viewed the Inquisitors with suspicion or disdain. This lack of cooperation limited the Inquisitors' access to resources and information, further hindering their effectiveness. Additionally, the Inquisitors' brutal methods often alienated local populations, creating resistance movements that indirectly supported the Jedi. The Empire's reliance on fear as a governing tool was mirrored in the Inquisitorius, but this approach frequently backfired, creating more enemies than it eliminated. The broader context of the Empire's dominance also played a role in the Inquisitorius struggles. The very fact that the Empire had ascended to power created a sense of complacency among its agents, including the Inquisitors. While the Jedi survivors fought with the desperation of a cause on the brink of extinction, the Inquisitors often acted as though their victory was inevitable. This arrogance blinded them to the resourcefulness and resilience of the Jedi. Furthermore, the Inquisitors' belief in the inevitability of their success often led them to underestimate the challenges they faced, resulting in costly mistakes. The failure of the Inquisitorius to decisively eliminate the Jedi was a microcosm of the Empire's broader failings. Despite its immense power and resources, the Empire was unable to completely crush the spirit of resistance in the galaxy. The Jedi, as symbols of hope and defiance, continued to inspire others, even in their diminished state. The Inquisitors, for all their power and training, were ultimately agents of an ideology that could not extinguish the ideals represented by the Jedi. Their inability to defeat the Jedi survivors was not just a tactical failure but a philosophical one. The light side of the Force, embodied by the Jedi, proved more enduring than the fear and darkness wielded by the Inquisitors. This interplay of factors ensured that the Inquisitorius, while fearsome in appearance, remained fundamentally ineffective in achieving its goals. Its creation was born out of the Empire's need to suppress dissent, but its inherent flaws made it incapable of eradicating the Jedi. The Jedi, even in their darkest hour, proved that their connection to the Force and their commitment to their ideals could overcome even the most relentless pursuit. In the end, the Inquisitor's failure was a testament to the resilience of the Jedi and the enduring power of hope in the face of oppression.